and he did injure my neck that night, and I didn't know till the next day, but I got a hernia.
I only feared him. That is what the Russian nightmare admitted. The man built as a Soviet weapon. The man who walked to the ring like he had never lost a fight in his life. Nikita Koloff. Shaved head, iron face, a body that looked like it was sculpted from stone. He was supposed to be unbreakable. He was supposed to be unstoppable. He was supposed to be the most dangerous man on the planet. He looked the part perfectly.
They thought it was part of the act, part of the show, and then at some point they figured out it's not part of the show.
When he walked through the curtain, crowds fell silent. When he lifted his arm, the arena held its breath. He was a monster. He was a machine. He was the Russian nightmare. That is what everyone believed. But he was not. Not inside, where it counted. Behind the character, behind the gimmick, behind 13 months of refusing to speak English in public, there was a man living in a state of constant fear. His real name was Nelson Scott Simpson. He came from Robbinsdale, Minnesota. He played football. Warno, he had dreams of making it in the NFL and in the USFL. He had tried out with the Tampa Bay Bandits. He was a physical specimen, 6'2", 285 pounds of what people called cut muscle. He looked like a professional athlete because he was one. But when those football dreams ran into injuries and dead ends, a door opened. His old college teammate, Joe Laurinaitis, better known as Road Warrior Animal, brought him into the wrestling business. Just like that. No long apprenticeship, no years learning the craft, just a phone call, a drive south to the southeast, a shaved head, and a new identity. He was now a Soviet powerhouse, designed to play on Cold War fears. Nelson Simpson stepped into the wrestling business with almost no training at all. Not a few months, almost nothing. He was not put through a wrestling school. He was not sent to smaller shows to find his feet. He was thrown straight into the main event spotlight of Jim Crockett Promotions, one of the biggest wrestling organizations in the country, and his debut match lasted 13 seconds. Not because it was a quick finish to a competitive bout. It was not a real match. It was a test. Could he walk to the ring, look threatening, and get out without falling over? Jim Crockett Jr., the promoter, made the stakes very clear. If Nikita tripped on the ropes, he was fired on the spot. Immediately. Gone. No second chance. And if you want more stories like this, sure, use the hype feature and give hype to the video, because this one gets darker the deeper we go. He survived day one. The crowd saw a monster. They had no idea they were looking at a man who had done almost no training. A man who was learning the business the same night they were watching him perform it. But the building believed. The cameras believed. And for that moment, Nikita Koloff existed. But day one was not the hard part. The hard part was every day after that. Because now he had to actually wrestle in front of thousands of fans, against men who had been in the business for years, against men who could spot someone green in the first 30 seconds of a match. And some of those men had very little patience for people who had not earned their spot. For the first year of his career, Nikita was guided in the ring by his on-screen uncle, Ivan Koloff, and a veteran named Don Kernodle. They were his guides, his protectors. Without them, he was exposed. He was learning every move, every hold, every psychological trick of the business on the job, in front of screaming crowds who thought they were watching a real Soviet destroyer. And every night, the fear was the same. Tonight might be the night someone finds out. Tonight might be the night it all falls apart. The Russian character gave him a shield. He refused to speak English in public for 13 months. He learned the Russian language. He legally changed his name to Nikita Koloff in 1988. The character became his armor. If he did not know what to do in a social situation with veterans in the locker room, he could stay silent. He could stare. He could look threatening, and nobody would know he had no idea what was really happening. But in the ring, when the bell rang, the armor had cracks, and the men on this list could see every single one. This is not simply a countdown of tough opponents. This is the story of a man who was thrown into the deep end with no swimming lessons, one in a pool full of sharks. And these are the 10 most dangerous sharks he ever encountered, counted down from number 10 to number 1. Number 10, Ivan Koloff. You might look at this entry and think it makes no sense. Ivan Koloff was Nikita's family on screen. He was the Russian bear, the legend, the man who gave Nikita his name, his character, and his spot in the company. He was the protector, the guide. Without Ivan Koloff, there is no Nikita Koloff. The whole character was built on the foundation of the Koloff legacy that Ivan had spent years constructing. And that is exactly the problem. When the person you are supposed to impress is also the person teaching you, the pressure is relentless. There was nowhere to hide. Ivan was a perfectionist. He had worked for years in the wrestling business. He had built his name through genuine hard work and genuine toughness. He had earned everything he had. And then here came Nelson Simpson, a footballer from Minnesota, a newcomer with almost no experience, wearing the Koloff name, playing the Koloff character. Abe benefiting from decades of work that Ivan had done to make that name mean something. Every time Nikita made a mistake in the ring, he was not just embarrassing himself, he was putting a mark on Ivan's legacy. If Nikita looked sloppy, if a promo went badly, if a spot fell apart in front of thousands of fans, it reflected directly on the man whose name he was wearing. And Ivan was watching every night, in the ring with him, often, observing every move. Nikita was open about this. He said that if he messed up a move or a promo, he felt like he was failing the legacy of the Koloff name. That was a heavy burden to carry every single night. It does not sound like the kind of fear that belongs next to men who carried forks and broke necks, but psychological weight carried every night across years of work adds up in ways that a single beating never can. It wears you down. It changes how you walk into a building. It changes how you approach every match. And Ivan Koloff sits at number 10 because the fear he represented was unique on this list. Not a fear of pain, not a fear of being physically outmatched, a fear of disappointment, of letting down the man who trusted you, of tarnishing something precious that belonged to someone else. That is a quiet, constant fear, and sometimes the quiet fears are the ones that do the most damage. They do not come in sharp and fast and then leave. They settle into you. They become part of how you work, and part of how you carry yourself every time you walk into a building. Ivan Koloff gave Nikita his name, his character, and his shot, and in return, Nikita had to carry the weight of that gift every single night he was in the ring. Number 9, Dick Murdoch. Dick Murdoch was a shooter. That word has a specific meaning in professional wrestling. A shooter is a man with real grappling ability, a man who can take a match out of the realm of performance and drag it into the realm of physical reality quickly whenever he chooses. And Dick Murdoch not only had that ability, he enjoyed using it. Murdoch's way of dealing with inexperienced wrestlers was not subtle, and it was not gentle. He would stretch them. Stretching in this context means applying legitimate holds, real joint pressure, real grinding of faces into the mat, bending limbs to the point where the pain was genuine and the message was clear. So you are at the bottom of this food chain. You have not paid your dues. And until you have, you are at the mercy of men like me. If a veteran like Murdoch decided to work genuinely stiff with Nikita, if he began applying holds that Nikita could not counter, so if he started demonstrating in front of a live crowd that the Russian monster could not handle real competition, the gimmick would have crumbled. The character would have looked helpless. And a monster who looks helpless has no use to anyone. The professional danger Murdoch represented went beyond what happened inside the ropes. Number 8, Magnum TA. Magnum TA was not dangerous in the ways most of the men on this list were dangerous. He was not a shooter who would stretch you. He was not a stiff worker who would hit you hard enough to rearrange your face. He was not a chaos agent who ignored agreed match structures. He was, in fact, one of the most gifted natural performers of his entire generation. And that is precisely why he belongs on this list. When two wrestlers are in a long series of matches, the pressure to improve with every outing is enormous. The crowd has already seen what you can do. They expect more. They expect escalation. They expect each match to be more intense, more dramatic, more emotionally resonant than the one before. And in 1986, Nikita Koloff and Magnum TA were locked into the best-of-7 series for the United States Heavyweight Championship. Night after night, week after week, they had to find a way to top the last contest. That kind of expectation is its own specific type of fear. There is no off night. There is no coast through it and come back stronger next time. Every single performance has to count. And for Nikita, who was still developing as a performer, who was still building the full toolkit of skills that a seasoned wrestler carries, he having to deliver at that level of expectation against someone as naturally talented as Magnum, night after night, was genuinely frightening. He pushed his body to its absolute limit in that series. He said both men pushed each other to the very edge of what their bodies could take. Every match left marks. Every night required something more. The physical toll was real, and the fear of having a bad night, of being the one who broke the standard the series had set, was constant. And then, in October 1986, Magnum TA was involved in a career-ending car accident. The series was unfinished. The rivalry was severed, and Nikita's entire position in the company shifted dramatically. Dusty Rhodes, who was both the top babyface and the creative decision-maker, turned Nikita from the most despised villain in the NWA into a fan favorite. It was a massive risk. It was also a massive success. The Superpowers team was formed. Nikita was placed on the do not fly list. And the company plane would not depart without 4 specific people aboard: Ric Flair, Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, and Nikita Koloff. That elevation brought protection. It also brought jealousy from peers who had not been given that kind of status, and who resented that a man with so little experience had been placed above them. Number 7. Ric Flair. There is a phrase every serious wrestling fan knows: getting a Broadway. A Broadway is a time limit draw, a match that runs its full allotted time without producing a clean winner. In the era of the National Wrestling Alliance, World Heavyweight Championship matches could run 30 minutes, 45 minutes, a full hour. Ric Flair could do all of it, every night, in a different city, against a different opponent, and make every one of those matches feel like the most important match in the world. Nikita Koloff was terrified of the Broadway. He said so directly. His gas tank was not built for that kind of duration. He was a power wrestler. Explosive bursts, devastating impacts, quick, decisive force. He was designed for short, brutal matches where he looked like an unstoppable force. He was not designed to sustain high-intensity wrestling for 30 to 60 minutes against the greatest technical performer in the world. And when you were in the ring with Ric Flair, sustaining that effort was not optional. It was the minimum requirement. In 1985, with barely 2 years in the business, Nikita was placed into a high-profile feud with Flair. This included the Freedom Challenge match on July 6, 1985, at the Great American Bash, a title match for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, a match that ran 23 minutes. For a man of Nikita's conditioning at that stage, 23 minutes against Ric Flair was the equivalent of running a race on legs that were not trained for the distance. Those 23 minutes were an endurance test that Nikita nearly failed in full view of thousands of people. Flair took the pin. It was presented as a one-fall match. Flair took the pin. It was presented as a dramatic finish. But the honest reality was that Nikita had run dry, and the match found its natural end because there was nothing left in him. Flair, being the master he was, used every one of those minutes to protect his opponent. He covered the cracks. He carried the story. He made the crowd believe in the danger, even as Nikita was running on empty. The feud is widely credited as one of the key things that elevated Nikita to genuine main event status. But for Nikita, the fear of being exposed mid-match, of the crowd understanding that the monster was gassed and vulnerable, was something that never fully left him in any contest against Flair. And those crowds generated a volatility of their own. The heat between the capitalist nature boy and the communist Russian nightmare created an intensity in arenas that sometimes went beyond simply passionate. It became dangerous. At certain points in the feud, Ric Flair had to be flown to the ring via helicopter to avoid being physically attacked by fans before the match even started. The environment around the rivalry was not just loud, it was volatile. It was a reminder that in that era, the stories wrestling told had a real emotional impact on real people. People who had grown up with Cold War fear on the news every night. People for whom a Soviet monster beating an American hero was not just entertainment. For Nikita, that extra layer of volatility in the buildings meant that the danger of working with Flair was not limited to the inside of the ropes. Number 6. Abdullah the Butcher. Abdullah the Butcher was not a wrestler in any conventional sense. He was an experience, an event, something that happened to you rather than something you participated in. His face told the entire story before he ever touched you, covered in scars, deep grooves carved into his forehead from decades of deliberate cutting, and in his hand, sometimes openly, a fork, an actual fork, used to gouge open opponents and cause genuine, visible, painful bleeding. His real name was Lawrence Shreve. He was enormous in both size and presence, and he operated by a set of rules that no one else in the business followed because he had invented those rules himself and had no interest in anyone else's. The agreed structure of a wrestling match meant nothing to Abdullah the Butcher. He was not interested in cooperating with a pre-planned sequence of events. He went where he went. He did what he did, and the person in the ring with him simply had to adapt and survive. For Nikita Koloff, facing Abdullah was a particular kind of nightmare. An inexperienced wrestler depends on structure to survive. He needs to know what is coming so he can prepare his body and his mind. He needs the agreed framework of a match to carry him through moments when his instincts are not fully developed. Abdullah gave none of that. He would pull a match in any direction at any time. If he felt the match needed a fork to the forehead, that was what was going to happen. If he decided the scripted performance should become something more real, and there was nothing Nikita could do to stop it. Every match with Abdullah carried the genuine risk of transitioning from performance into a real physical struggle, a shoot in the language of the business. And for someone who was still working to protect himself while maintaining the convincing illusion of the Russian nightmare character, a match that turned into a real struggle was the worst possible outcome. Not just because of the physical risk, but because in a real struggle, the lack of training would be completely, undeniably visible. Nikita said Abdullah was a horror film come to life. He said that when you saw the scars and saw the fork, you understood that this was not show business to Abdullah. It never had been. And that is the heart of what made the butcher so frightening. He was doing something genuinely real in a world that tried very hard to look real while being something else. Abdullah collapsed the difference every time. For experienced wrestlers, this could sometimes be managed, redirected, used as part of the theater. For Nikita, who was still building the instincts and reflexes that come from years of real training, there was no reliable way to steer what Abdullah set in motion. You stepped through the curtain, the bell rang, and whatever happened next was Abdullah's choice, not yours. Number 5, Road Warrior Hawk, Michael Hegstrand. Road Warrior Hawk, the other half of the most feared, most respected, and most dangerous tag team in the history of professional wrestling. And by the general agreement of the people who worked with both of them, Hawk was the more reckless of the two, the one with no internal control on his physical output, the one who went full intensity all the time, regardless of context or consequence, regardless of what was agreed or what was safe for the people around him. Hawk had what people described as a Mad Max quality to him. He was overexcitable. He was known to be harsh with lesser opponents, workers who were not at the level of the Road Warriors. He would go harder than was necessary. He would push beyond what was agreed. And in the chaotic, multi-man, cage match environments that Nikita found himself in regularly during this period, Hawk was the most unpredictable force in the room on any given night. The Doomsday Device was the Road Warriors' signature finishing move. It was spectacular, while it was also a move in which the person receiving it had absolutely no control over their own safety. You were lifted onto a man's shoulders, held in place, and then another man came off the ropes at full speed and hit you with a clothesline. You landed however you landed. If the timing was off, if the height was wrong, if Hawk misjudged his approach in any way, the person on the receiving end could be seriously hurt. And Hawk misjudged things. Not rarely, regularly. Because there was no internal governor telling him to slow down or pull back. Nikita worked alongside the Road Warriors in high-stakes matches, including the first War Games event in 1987. In the chaotic environment of a steel cage filled with 8 men, with Hawk operating at full speed and full force, the risk of legitimate injury to a teammate was just as real as the risk from an opponent. Hawk did not always distinguish between the two with the precision that the situation required. The fear of Road Warrior Hawk was the fear of a friend who did not know how dangerous he was, a friend who carried chaos into every match he entered, every building he walked into, every situation he was part of, and who would, on any given night, be the reason someone went home needing medical attention. That is not a comfortable fear to carry, but for Nikita, it was a very honest one. And in the world of the 1980s territories, honest fear was the most valuable thing you could have. It kept you alert. It kept you aware. It kept you from becoming complacent in an environment where complacency could end your career in a moment. Hawk was a constant, living reminder that the dangers in that world did not always come from the men on the opposite side of the ring. Number 4, Road Warrior Animal. Joe Laurinaitis opened the door to the wrestling business for Nelson Scott Simpson. Without Animal, there is no Nikita Koloff. The story begins and ends with that phone call. And that recruitment, that decision to bring a college teammate with a footballer's body down to the Southeast and reinvent him as a Soviet monster. Animal created the opportunity. Animal provided the connection. Animal was the reason any of this was possible. And Animal was genuinely terrifying. He was one of the most physically powerful men in the wrestling business, in a business that was full of large, powerful men. His size and strength were extraordinary, even by the standards of the Road Warriors, who were themselves among the most imposing figures of the era. But the specific danger Animal represented to Nikita was not about size or status. It was about something more basic and more honest. Animal was so strong and so physical that he sometimes could not accurately gauge the difference between performance intensity and real intensity. If time working alongside Nikita decided to press slam him. A press slam is a spectacular move. One man lifts another completely above his head and throws him. Done with communication, with preparation, with an agreement between both people, it can be executed safely. Done without warning, with the full explosive power of someone like Road Warrior Animal, it is something entirely different. There was no warning. There was no communication. Animal lifted Nikita with everything he had. The velocity, the height, the completely unplanned nature of what followed, all of it hit Nikita at once. He was caught entirely off guard. The experience shook him in a way that stayed with him. And after that moment, he told the Road Warriors directly and firmly, never again. Would do not do that to me without asking first. But there was a deeper layer to the fear Animal represented. Animal was the man who believed in Nikita before Nikita had done anything to justify that belief. He was the reason Nikita had a job, which meant that the fear of letting Animal down, of being exposed as the weak link in a partnership Animal had created, of being unable to keep pace with a team that had the entire wrestling world in awe, was its own enormous weight. In the first War Games match, even the veteran Four Horsemen were reportedly scared of what Animal might do to them if things went wrong. The respect and fear Animal commanded in that locker room was total, and Nikita was in the middle of all of it, every night, trying not to be the one who broke the standard everyone else was measuring themselves against. Number 3, Stan Hansen. If you ask the people who worked in the territory system during the 1980s to name the man who was most physically punishing to be in the ring with, the vast majority of them would give you the same answer. Stan Hansen, the bad boy from Borger, Texas. The man with the cowbell, the man with the lariat, the man who, by nearly universal agreement, was the stiffest worker in the entire history of the sport. Stiff means he hit hard, not as a performance choice, not to look impressive to the crowd. Stan Hansen hit hard because he could not see clearly without his glasses, and without the ability to accurately judge the distance between himself and his opponent, he compensated the only way available to him. He swung at full force every single time. If the strike landed, it landed with everything he had. If it missed, he tried again with the same power. The result was that every single match with Stan Hansen was a guaranteed physical experience. You were not going to leave that ring without feeling it. The only question was how much damage you were going to absorb. Nikita Koloff said it clearly. You always checked your teeth after a match with Stan Hansen because you genuinely were not certain all of them would still be there. That is not show business language. That is the honest statement of a man who had been on the receiving end of real force and knew what it felt like. The Hansen lariat was the most feared finishing move in the territory era. It was a clothesline delivered at full speed with total body weight behind it. It had genuinely broken the neck of Bruno Sammartino, one of the most physically durable men in the entire history of the sport. If it could break Bruno's neck, it could break anyone's neck. And in the hands of a man who genuinely could not see where he was aiming it, every single time he threw it was a roll of the dice. For Nikita, who had not been through the years of defensive training that experienced wrestlers develop over time, the vulnerability to Hansen's style was heightened. Experienced wrestlers learn to absorb strikes safely. They learn how to position their body to take impact without sustaining damage. They develop instincts that take years to build. And Nikita was still building all of that at the same time as he was wrestling 454 matches in a single year against men who were doing everything at full force. The statistical likelihood of a catastrophic encounter under those conditions was not small. Every match with Stan Hansen was a guarantee, not a possibility, a guarantee. You were going to be hurt. The variable was the severity, and for a man already living in fear of being exposed and ended, with knowledge that surviving a match with Stan would be a very specific kind of weight to every time their paths crossed. At the same time, there was something else operating underneath the fear of Hansen. The knowledge that surviving a match with Stan Hansen meant something. It was evidence. It was proof that you were tough enough to belong in the same ring as men who did not accommodate weakness. For Nikita, every match that ended with him still standing was a small argument against all the doubters. Hansen hurt him. But Hansen also, in a way, helped build him. Number 2, Bruiser Brody. Frank Goodish, Bruiser Brody, the wildest, most unpredictable, most completely uncontrollable figure in professional wrestling throughout the 1980s. A man who operated on entirely different terms from everyone else in the industry, who took the unspoken agreements and professional courtesies of the wrestling business and simply discarded them, night after night, without apology and without consequence. Or now moved like a man who was not performing the idea of danger, but was actively containing it from spilling out and consuming everything around him. And underneath all of that presentation was someone who genuinely, structurally refused to cooperate with the people around him. He would no-sell. That means he would refuse to react when his opponent hit him. You would land your biggest move, the move the whole match had been building towards, the move the crowd had been waiting for, and Brody would just stand there, looking at you, not falling, not flinching, not giving the crowd what they had paid to see, and now you were standing in the ring with no plan, no agreed next step, a confused crowd, and a man staring at you who had just made your best effort look completely ineffective. For Nikita Koloff, the potential consequences of that scenario were severe. His whole character was built on impact, on power, on the idea that when the Russian nightmare hit you, you went down and you stayed down. If Brody no-sold him in the middle of a match, that character collapsed instantly. The Russian nightmare looked like a man who could not hurt anyone, and a monster who cannot hurt anyone has no use to anyone. Nikita worked in Puerto Rico for the World Wrestling Council, and Brody was there too. The fear was constant and specific, not just physical danger, not just the risk of Brody refusing to cooperate, but the psychological weight of never knowing which version of Brody would walk walk through the curtain each night, the one who would work with you and give the fans a real show, or the one who would pull the whole thing apart without a second thought. And then in 1988, Bruiser Brody was murdered, stabbed in the dressing room showers of an arena in Puerto Rico by a fellow wrestler named Jose Gonzalez. He died from the wounds. The most unpredictable man in professional wrestling was gone, violently, suddenly, in a place Nikita knew well. After that, Nikita Koloff never returned to Puerto Rico. The territory had become something he could not separate from the worst possible truth about the business he had given his life to. Number 1, Big Van Vader. And here we are, the end of the list. The man at number 1 is not simply the scariest figure on paper. He is the proof, the final, irrefutable evidence that every fear Nikita Koloff had carried since a 13-second debut match with a promoter threatening to fire him if he tripped on the ropes was not paranoia. It was accurate. It was wisdom. It was Nikita's body and mind telling him the truth that eventually caught up with him. Big Van Vader, Leon White, 350 pounds of the most explosively powerful man in the early 1990s wrestling landscape. By the time Nikita crossed paths with him, if Vader had already become the definitive monster archetype of his era. He was not just large, he was fast for his size in a way that made no physical sense. He was agile, he was explosive, and he hit with a speed and force that Ken Shamrock once described as producing strikes so rapid that there was genuinely no time to pull them, no time to adjust, no time to prepare. The blunt force trauma was simply going to happen, and the only question was where on your body it would land. The match took place at Halloween Havoc 1992. The context matters. It was booked under Bill Watts, the intimidating, uncompromising promoter who had always made Nikita uneasy with his demands for absolute physical realism. It was booked as a glorified squash match, meaning Nikita was not there to compete on equal terms. He was there to be dismantled. That was the booking decision. That was the story Bill Watts wanted to tell. And Vader delivered on that story with complete, when unsentimental honesty. One clothesline from Big Van Vader, one single clothesline, and the in-ring career of Nikita Koloff was over. The medical evaluation that followed was grim. A herniated disc in the cervical spine, severe bone spurring throughout the neck, severe arthritis. Nikita was 33 years old at the time, but his neck carried the biological age of a 55-year-old man. The cumulative damage of years of hard matches, of the brutal 454 match schedule he had worked through in 1986 alone, of countless stiff opponents, had been building inside his body the whole time. Vader walked into the ring and applied the final decisive pressure to a structure that was already at its limit. There was also an inguinal hernia, sustained while attempting to lift Vader during the match itself. The damage was not limited to his neck. Multiple systems in his body had reached their endpoint simultaneously. He was 33 years old, and his body was telling him plainly and clearly that it was finished. He retired. Not with a grand farewell, not with a celebration of a career that had achieved 5 world titles, but because the body that had carried the Russian Nightmare character across hundreds of cities and thousands of opponents had nothing left to give. Vader did not plan to end Nikita's career that night. He was simply what he was. An overwhelming physical force in a business where such forces are allowed to operate without restraint. And Nikita ran into him at the wrong time, in the wrong match, under the wrong booking, in a body that had been quietly giving out for longer than anyone had admitted. Number 1 is not the scariest name on paper. It is the name of the man who proved that the fear was right all along. And when you understand that, you understand the entire story of Nikita Koloff differently. Every man on this list was not just an opponent. Every one of them was a test of whether the gimmick could survive contact with reality. Most of those tests Nikita passed, until the one he could not. And now, after all of that, the ending. 10 men, 10 different kinds of fear. One man who carried all of it for years and came out the other side with something the wrestling business could never give him on its own. He used his wrestling past as a bridge. He sometimes set up a wrestling ring as a church space and invited people to pray around the apron. The ring that had been a place of fear and physical punishment became a place of stillness and reflection. He wrote 3 books: Breaking the Chains, published in 2002, Wrestling with Success, published in 2004, and in Nikita, A Tale of the Ring and Redemption, published in 2011, which told the complete story of the man behind the character. The man who once refused to speak English for 13 months to protect a lie now speaks openly about faith and honesty and purpose. The man who feared being exposed above all else now invites people to see exactly who he is. The man who was thrown into the most dangerous locker room in the country with almost no preparation now walks into rooms full of people in their hardest moments and offers them something no title belt and no gimmick ever could. Something real. Think about that full journey. A football player from Robbinsdale, Minnesota, recruited into the wrestling business with almost no no training, thrown into the main event spotlight, living in daily fear of being hurt, being exposed, being embarrassed, being controlled by people who resented his fast rise, surviving shooters and monsters and chaos agents and administrators with personal grudges, working 454 matches in a single year, and then being finally stopped by the one man who was simply too much for any human body to absorb. And after all of that, finding something that felt genuinely real, not the character, not the gimmick, not the performance, something true. The Russian Nightmare was built on fear, fear of being found out, a fear of being destroyed, fear of the men on this list and what they could take from him. Number 10 to number 1, 10 fears, 10 men, 1 survivor, and now finally no nightmares at all. When Nelson Scott Simpson found something on the other side of the ring that was worth far more than everything the Russian Nightmare had ever earned him. He found real peace at last. He found real lasting purpose. He found himself completely. And that is a story that no villain gimmick and no Soviet persona could ever have written on its own.